Welcome to the Newsa-Cast YouTube channel. These Red Smith Banquet throwbacks are exclusive interviews of sports legends, powerful media personalities, and influential coaches. You won't find these anywhere else. Subscribe below and enjoy. Well, folks, it's Red Smith Banquet throwback time, where we go back and take a look at who has graced our presence at the Red Smith Banquet through the years. And Tosh, this year, or this episode, we're going to go back to 2011 and a name that we're all familiar with, I think, Mr. Greg Gumbel.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, the Gumbel name has been in, whether it's announcing on TV shows or sports announcing with Greg. It's when you hear Gumbel, you know what you're talking about. You know who you're talking about.
Absolutely. His brother Bryant, of course, he was. He's still around as well. He was a morning show host for a long time. And Greg now, you currently catch him on CBS Sports basketball, but we've caught a lot of years where he did football, and just one of those great classic play-by-play voices that we all love and can't imagine life without him, really.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? He actually was the first African-American announcer to call play-by-play of a major sports championship in the United States when he did the Super Bowl for CBS in 2001.
Oh, very nice. I didn't know that. Well, that's excellent. And we're cutting edge. We had Leslie Visser the other day, where the other couple of episodes ago, right, Tash? She was the first woman broadcaster in basketball. So we have them all here at the Red Smith Banquet.
Yeah, now he's kind of concentrating on college basketball, where you can find him on CBS doing college basketball. Actually, his contract was just renewed in March of this year. So nice. Tune in over the winter and you're going to hear Greg Gumbel on CBS for sure.
Absolutely. In the meantime, sit back, enjoy, go back to the Paper Valley Hotel on a January night in 2011.
Tonight we have with us Greg Gumbel, currently host and play-by-play announcer on CBS TV for NFL games with Dan Deerdorf. Great job last Saturday with the Steelers and the Falcons. We really enjoyed it. What a great history of involvement in the sports world. He hosted the Emmy Award-winning The NFL Today show, primetime anchor of CBS Sports coverage of the 1994 Olympics, the Olympic Winter Games, and anchor of the 92 Olympic Winter Games on NBC. Greg was daytime host for the 1996 Summer Olympic Games in Atlanta, play-by-play announcer, Major League Baseball, hosted college football broadcast, college basketball, the NCAA College Basketball Tournament, NBA games, NBA playoff games, and the NCAA Division I College Baseball World Series Championship games. What a resume. Born in New Orleans, grew up in Chicago, was his high school most valuable player, batting .378. That was his senior year. He graduated from Loras College, Dubuque, Iowa, and began his broadcasting career at WMAQ TV in Chicago. On to ESPN, worked WFAN New York City radio, moving to CBS, and in '94 moved to NBC Sports and returned to CBS. Please welcome Greg Gumbel.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad Jeff talked about flying. As I flew into town this afternoon, arrived at Appleton International Airport. Hey, it was a nice flight, and my luggage arrived with me. I'm a happy camper. Anybody who flies a lot will tell you that things can happen, and they do. I was flying up to New York, and I don't even remember where I was flying from. It was on a U.S. air flight. Have you ever been on a plane where the pilot pushes the wrong button and he thinks he's talking to air traffic control, but he's really talking to the people on the plane? They had just cleared away breakfast, and we're cruising along at 31, 33, 35,000 feet. And the pilot pushes the wrong button, and we hear him say, U.S. Air 445, we'll keep a lookout. No one thinks anything of that. Continuing to read, and about a minute later, he pushes the wrong button again, and we hear him say, U.S. Air 445, nope, not a thing. Now, no one's paying attention to this, but there's this little warning buzzer that's going off in the back of my head. And sure enough, 30 seconds later, he makes the same mistake. He pushes the wrong button, and we hear him say, U.S. Air 445, we still don't see him. Are you sure he's coming right at us? I flew in on Delta Airlines today. I had a really interesting flight in the mid-90s. I was on a Delta flight from Atlanta to LaGuardia that arrived just short of the runway. The pilot sheared the rear landing gear off into the water, and we slid sideways down the runway till about maybe 75 feet from the other end. And everybody went down the forward emergency chute into a driving rainstorm. It is a heck of a way to jumpstart your heart on a Saturday afternoon. But those things pale by comparison to other things. All I ask when I travel is, please let me sit next to someone who is sane. I was on a flight from Orlando to Salt Lake City, a Boeing 767, very nice airplane. I was sitting in seat 2B, a very nice seat. This lady gets on and she sits next to me, and she sits next to the window, and I say hello, and she says hello. And she's kind of antsy, and she's looking around, and I said, is there a problem? And she says, well, I'm traveling with my husband, and I just wondered if you wouldn't mind changing seats with him. And I said, no, I don't mind. And I started picking up my stuff. I said, where is he sitting? She said, 32J. And then today, I board my flight in Detroit, coming up here. The guy sitting across the aisle from me looks at me and he says, Greg Gumbel. And I said, no. And he said, yeah. And I said, no. And he said, yeah. And I said, no. And he says, you want to bet? And I looked at him. I said, what? He said, I'll bet you $100 you're Greg Gumbel. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to cash his check or not. And then there was this time I was doing an NCAA tournament game in Tucson, Arizona. And my partner, Digger Phelps, and I, and this was back in the early 90s. And Digger Phelps and I are doing the game, and we're out on the floor, and we're rehearsing the opening to the show. And about 15 rows up, there's a guy yelling, Brian! Hey, Brian! And I ignored him. And he keeps yelling, hey, Brian! Finally, our producer says, okay, guys, take 5. We're going to check some things here in the truck. Everybody takes a break. I take a walk up the steps. And I walk up to this guy, and this guy says, hey, Brian, I am a really big fan of yours. And I said, is that right? And he says, absolutely. He says, I watch you all the time. And I said, all the time? He goes, I never miss a show. I said, you watch the Today Show in the morning with the interviews with the politicians and the economists and the newsmakers of the day? He goes, yeah, I catch all that stuff. I said, well then, maybe you can tell me what the hell I'm doing in Tucson, doing a college basketball game, wearing a jacket with a patch that says CBS Sports. And he hesitated, but only for a second. He goes, I was going to ask you about that. So I'm very patient sometimes. And I explained to him that I'm Greg, that Bryant's my brother, and Bryant hadn't done sports for about 18, 19 years. And that I'm the one that was at ESPN and Madison Square Garden. When I give him the short history, he never interrupts. He never says a word. When I finish, we shake hands. I tell him to enjoy the game. I start to walk down the steps, and he yells after me, "Say hi to Willard for us." As fun as those things are, they begin to pale with some of the fun that I've had in dealing with sports and sports people. And Jeff and Ron and the rest of you former athletes out there, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about other athletes, some of whom have made me extremely appreciative over the years of the value of a good education. Now, I don't mean to intimate that these people are dumb, not all of them, but these are real, true stories. And I can think of no more appropriate a story to begin with than the football game that I was covering at Soldier Field in Chicago between the Bears and the Green Bay Packers. A tight defensive struggle, as games between two old rivals usually are. Goes right down to the final minutes of the game. One team fumbles deep in enemy territory. The other recovers, takes it in, only points of the day. I talked with the guy who recovered the fumble after the game. A defensive tackle, big number 79 from Chuck Berry State University or someplace like that. Here's what he said. He said, in a case like that, you got to keep your confidence, play your game. Most important, you got to stay flexual and give yourself a chance to win. I spent 3 days in the library looking for flexual. I couldn't find it. Not so long ago, during one of those horrible seasons the Detroit Lions have been having, the press was questioning one member of the team about the troubles, about the losing streak, about what the problem might be. He said, "We need a coach with an imaginary mind." I'm a big music fan. I am a big rock fan. I am a true child of the 60s. You ask anyone who knows me, they will tell you I am the biggest fan of the Rolling Stones that you will ever see in your entire life. The things that I have managed to do in my career pale next to the fact that I got to meet them. I got to know them. I get to go backstage when they tour. I get to go to the parties. I get great seats at concerts. Keith Richards has been my hero for forever. I love the Rolling Stones. I was talking about music with a bunch of football players one day, and I happened to mention I'm a big Stones fan. This one guy says, "Yeah, me too, Fred and Wilma and Barney." When Stanley Shakespeare was playing wide receiver for the University of Miami football team, he told a crowd gathered around his locker one day, "To be or not to be, I definitely is." Now, baseball players are off in their own little world too sometimes. I don't know why that is. They just are. One guy was standing in the outfield before a game one day, and a teammate walked by. And he said, "Hey, what time is it?" The other guy said, "You mean now?" Remember kind of a strange guy, used to pitch for the Detroit Tigers by the name of Mark Fidrich? The Bird, yeah. Talked to the baseball out on the mound. Mark and a teammate show up at the ballpark one day, and just as they're about to walk through the gates, Mark snaps his fingers. He said, I have to go back to the hotel. I forgot my razor. His teammate says, use my Norelco. Mark says, no thanks, I'll take a cab. One baseball team was crossing over the Canadian border one day to play against the Toronto Blue Jays. At customs, a customs official asked one of the pitchers if he had anything to declare. The pitcher said, yes, I am damn proud to be an American. Johnny Logan, the former shortstop for the Milwaukee Braves, was one of the great ones. He was great when he stepped onto the field to play the game. He was great when he was talking with the press after the game. This is Johnny Logan. Rome wasn't born in a day. He once received an award and then told the assembled crowd, I will perish this trophy forever. And when Johnny Logan was asked to name the greatest baseball player of all time, he said, I'd have to go with the immoral Babe Ruth. And then there was the former manager, Danny Ozark, whose team was in a horrible downward spiral, a terrible losing streak, and he was asked about the team morale, and he said, at this point, morality isn't a factor. Two guys who are memorable in baseball lore. One, Mickey Rivers, who played for several teams. And Mickey was amazing. Mickey was a walking, talking sitcom. Mickey once said, me, Billy Martin, and George Steinbrenner, we're two of a kind. They asked Mickey once what his goals were for the year. He said, my goals are to hit 300, score 100 runs, and stay injury-prone. He once told a group of kids at a youth clinic, the first thing you do when you get out to center field is put your finger in the air and check the wind chill factor. And the one that I personally think is the best Mickey Rivers story of and I know you've done this with your friends, play little trivia games. You sit around, throw out a question, see if they know the answer. Someone throws a question back at you. The players were doing that on the team bus one day. Mickey comes up with this one. What was the name of the dog in Rin Tin Tin? The other baseball guy is Yogi Berra. And all those stories that you ever hear told about Yogi, they're all true. Yogi saw the movie The Magnificent Seven with Steve McQueen in it, and afterwards Yogi said he must have made that one before he died. Yogi makes his home in New Jersey, and one day he was burning some trash in his backyard, and the fire kind of got out of control. So he rushes into his house and he calls the local fire department and he says, this is Yogi Berra, I got a fire burning in my backyard, can you guys come over and help me out? And the guy on the phone says, sure thing, Yogi, can you tell us how we get there? And Yogi says, well, don't you guys still have them big red trucks? My favorite Yogi story, and by the way, he is a wonderful guy, a very warm human being. He's just funny. He's a guest on a talk show. The host goes to commercial. And during the commercial, he turns to Yogi and he said, when we come back, are you up for doing some word association? And Yogi says, what's that? And the host says, I'll say something, and then you say the first thing that comes to your head. Like if I say up, you might say down. If I say stop, you might say go. If I say left, you might say right. Yogi says, yeah, okay. So they come back from commercial, and the host says, we're back with Yogi Berra, and Yogi has agreed to do a little word association with us. You ready, Yogi? Yogi says, yeah. So the host says, okay, Yogi, Mickey Mantle. Yogi says, what about him? This is also a true story. Yogi's wife, trying to do some planning, asked Yogi where he wanted to be buried. And Yogi said, "Surprise me." One very noted and well-respected baseball manager once said, "I know it's an old touche, but the cream always rises to the top." One baseball player was asked the capital of Argentina. He said, "Buenos dias." Jim Leland, a fine man, a fine manager, manages the Detroit Tigers these days, has produced some terrific baseball teams over the years, but especially in Pittsburgh. But when he first took over there, the situation was an absolute mess. He said, "I knew I was in for a long year when we lined up for the national anthem on opening day, and I heard one of my players say, 'You know, every time I hear that song, I have a bad game.'" There are some basketball players who've made their mark. Shaquille O'Neal returned from an exhibition tour in Greece, and a reporter asked him if he went to the Parthenon, and Shaq said, "No, we didn't hit any of the local clubs." One senior basketball player at the University of Pittsburgh once said, "I'm going to graduate on time, no matter how long it takes." The world of boxing gives such copious examples of how not to speak. There are not enough days left in the month to cover everything. Certainly nothing Mike Tyson did. We won't go there, but we do have Don King, the master of the English language. Don King was talking about a fighter, and he said he's the man of the hour at this particular moment. And Don King once said this: "I am the greatest promoter in boxing today because I have not taken a day off since the day I left the penitentiary, and because I have read all the great philosophers, like St. Thomas Aquinas." And, you know, you may sit there and laugh at this stuff and think that it's all very funny, but you've never known embarrassment until you've been in a restaurant with an athlete who ordered a giraffe of wine. Now, there are the coaches who are sometimes classic in every sense of the word. Shelby Metcalf was the basketball coach at Texas A&M, and one of his players had a report card showing a D and 4 Fs. And the coach looked at his player and said, "Son, looks to me like you're spending too much time on one subject." Bill Peterson used to coach the Houston Oilers. He once said, "3 things are bad for you. I can't remember the first 2, but donuts are the third." Peterson is the one who was coaching at Florida State. He told his team one day, "You guys line up alphabetically by height." And then the very next day, he told his team, "You guys pair up in groups of 3 and then line up in a circle." And then there was the college coach who told his team just before a big game, "If we play as well as we are capable of playing, and they play as well as they are capable of playing, we're going to lose." One more coach story. Remember Bum Phillips? His son Wade started the season as the head coach of the Cowboys, has now been signed by the defensive coordinator for the Houston Oilers. Bum was a terrific coach. But he was asked once why he takes his wife on all the road trips. His answer, "Because she's too damn ugly to kiss goodbye." I didn't say it. Just told us. No, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that announcers don't do their share. One of my favorite stories involves one of my favorite people, Pat Summerall. And he and John Madden were doing a football game out in San Francisco. The game is getting close to starting time. Now, Pat Summerall is not, and was not, at the time of this story, well-versed in music. That's not a knock on him, he just isn't. And he certainly wasn't back then at this time. The game is getting close to starting time. The producer in the truck pushes the button that allows him to speak directly into Pat's ear. And he says, "Pat, Huey Lewis and the News, national anthem." Silence. Once more. "Pat, Huey Lewis and the News, national anthem." Still no response from Pat. Once more forcefully. "Pat, Huey Lewis and the News, national anthem." And live on the air, Pat Summerall says, "We'll have our national anthem coming up in just a moment, but first we have a news bulletin. Let's go back to New York. Here's Huey Lewis." New Yorkers would know the name Ralph Kiner very well, one of the great sluggers in baseball history. Ralph, broadcaster for the New York Mets. And Ralph hasn't exactly mastered the language the way he used to master opposing pitchers. One day the cameras got a shot of George Shinn, who was the owner of the Charlotte Hornets of the NBA, sitting there in the stands, and Ralph says, "And there's George Shinn, the owner of the Charlotte Harlots." And a few years back, doing a Mets game on Father's Day, Ralph says this: "Welcome back to Shea Stadium on this Father's Day. Sunny skies, warm temperatures, beautiful afternoon. And on this very special day, we'd just like to say to all of you proud fathers out there, happy birthday." I was in Birmingham, England in March of 1995. I did the World Figure Skating Championships there for NBC. As you may know, figure skating competition is divided into short programs and long programs. Men's short, men's long, ladies short, ladies long, pairs, ice dancing. A guy doing TV over there for the BBC turns to his partner one night and says, "Well, Dabney, what do you expect?" And Dabney says, "Well, Charles, I think we could see some amazing things coming out of men's shorts this evening." News reporters. How about the night Neil Armstrong first walked on the moon? A woman reporting for NBC's Nightly News approached Charles Percy, who at the time was a senator from Illinois, and she said, "Senator Percy, did you watch the moonwalk?" Senator Percy said, "Yes, I did. It was very inspirational." She said, "Did you watch it on television?" There is a broadcaster for the San Diego Padres by the name of Jerry Coleman, former ball player, lovable, great guy. For some reason, there is no filter, no safeguard between his brain and his mouth. He says stuff during a game. I've talked with broadcast partners of his, and they just turn and look at him in utter disbelief. The stories about Jerry sometimes leave the rest of us in the broadcast field speechless. This is just some of Jerry Coleman. That's the fourth extra base hit tonight for the Padres, 2 doubles and a triple. Montreal is leading Atlanta by 3, 5-1. The first pitch to Tucker Ashford is grounded into left field. No, wait a minute, it's ball 1, low and outside. For George Hendrick, that's his 19th home run of the season. One more, and he reaches double figures. Also on the scoreboard, Kansas City is at Chicago tonight. Or is Chicago in Kansas City? No matter, Kansas City leads it in the 8th, 4-4. Last night's home run was Willie Stargell's 399th career homer, leaving him one shy of 500. I, of course, am not completely without fault. I'm the one who went on the air in Chicago one night and announced that in the finals of the Phoenix International Tennis Tournament, Jimmy Connors defeated Harold Solomon in straight sets. And perhaps the best one of them all, I signed off on ESPN one night by saying the following. That'll do it for this edition of the ESPN Sports Center. Coming up next, Willie Mosconi and Minnesota Fats in the Legends of Pocket Pool. I will never deny the fact that I've been very fortunate in a career that began in 1973 at WMAQ in Chicago, where I spent 7.5 years, and then came the 5.5 years at ESPN, Madison Square Garden Network in New York for 3, CBS Sports for 5, NBC Sports for 4, and then back to CBS Sports in 98. Let's forget for the moment the fact that I obviously can't hold a job. This is just a list of some of the people I have been privileged not just to have gotten to know, but to have worked with. Jim Cott and Bobby Mercer and Joe Morgan and Steve Garvey, and Joe Montana and Phil Simms and Dan Deerdorf, and Terry Bradshaw and Dan Marino and Chris Collinsworth and Mike Ditka and Joe Gibbs and Boomer Esiason and Kenny Stabler, and Quinn Buckner and Clark Kellogg and Greg Anthony and Dean Smith and Walt Frazier and Bill Walton and Magic Johnson. Some I got to know better than others, of course, and some stories will stay with me forever. When I worked in Chicago, not only did I get to know the great Chicago Bears running back Walter Payton, we became great friends, and we were friends for more than 20 years. 9 times a Pro Bowl running back, Mike Ditka once said of Walter, he was the greatest football player I've ever seen, but he was an even greater person, and that he was. When I left Chicago to join ESPN, I'd return often because I still have family there, and I wasn't allowed to stay in a hotel. I stayed with Walter and Connie in their home. And Walter was a fun-loving, devilish prankster, joker, troublemaker. Someone gave him a brand new Lamborghini, and one day he took me for a ride on the Illinois toll road. And at one point, I leaned over to take a peek at the speedometer, and we were going about 125 miles an hour. And I didn't want to appear to be the wimp that I am. So I said to Walter, aren't you concerned about the cops? And he never took his eyes off the road. He just shook his head and said, no, they don't have anything this fast. He was very special, and so was Bill Veeck, who owned several Major League Baseball teams in his lifetime, and I got to know him when he became the owner of the Chicago White Sox. And without a lot of money to spend, Bill was basically renting players for a year at a time, trying to win games and make ends meet. Stupid me, I was highly critical of this practice. On air, mind you. Plus, I didn't like all the little shows he'd put on before the game, and Harry Carey taking showers out in center field and a clown coaching first base. One day I got a call from his secretary. Bill wanted to invite my wife and me out to the ballpark one evening for dinner and drinks and to watch a game. And I thought, and I told my wife, here's where he's going to lower the boom. So we went out to the ballpark one evening, and he had someone meet us down in the parking lot, and parked the car, and we went upstairs, and the restaurant in the old Comiskey Park was called the Bard's Room, and we sat down with Bill and his wife, Mary Frances, and we sat there and we had drinks, and we had a wonderful steak dinner, and all we did was talk about everything under the sun except the White Sox. And then it was game time. And Bill had a habit of watching the game from the press box with the sports writers. But he had a box seat for my wife and me. And the game started, and my wife said, when is he going to lower the boom? And I said, well, it's going to be after the game. And after the game was over, we met Bill and his wife up in the Bard's Room for after-dinner drinks. And just as I thought, here it comes, he goes, this has been fun. Let's do this again sometime. And I went downstairs, and we got in the car, and my wife looked at me, and I said, he did it. He lowered the boom, and I didn't even know it. And it worked. I have to admit, I went easier on him thereafter, much easier. And I'm always reminded of that and of him whenever I read this quote from him. All I ever said is that you can draw more people with a losing team plus bread and circuses than with a losing team and a long, still silence. And I miss Bill Veeck. One other story, I was a second grader living with my family in Washington, D.C. while my dad was finishing Georgetown Law School. And it was in D.C. that he took me to see my first ever Major League Baseball game. And I was in second grade, and we went to see the Washington Senators play the Cleveland Indians. And the game went to extra innings, and in the 11th inning, Larry Doby hit a home run to beat the Senators. We're going back home, and I'm the typical second grader. I said, who hit that home run? And my dad says, Larry Doby. And I said, his name should be Larry Dopey. And my dad says, I hope you get a chance to say that to him one day. In 1978, I'm working in Chicago, and Bill Veeck hires Larry Doby to be the manager of the Chicago White Sox. And on his first day on the job, I walked out to him behind the batting cage and introduced myself, and I said, you have a moment, I have a story to tell you. And he laughed pretty hard. Jackie Robinson was the first African-American Major League Baseball player. Larry Doby was the second, and he was the first to play in the American League. Led the American League in home runs twice, and was an all-star 9 times in a 13-year baseball career, was voted to the Baseball Hall of Fame, and was one of the nicest people that I've ever known. And then there's Muhammad Ali. And I don't have to recount his exploits for you, but this story spans about 25 years, and it still amazes me to this day. Again, I'm working in Chicago in the mid-'70s, and Muhammad did something outrageous. And I wasn't crazy about all of his shenanigans. And I went on the air one night, and I basically called the heavyweight champion of the world a lightweight human being. I might have had a death wish back then. The very next day, after I did that, I'm walking down the hallway in our studio, and he's coming in the other direction. And there was just nowhere to go. I was trying to melt into paint. And I'm standing there, and he walks by, and he looks at me, and he nods to me, and I nod to him, and he says, "Are you good with your dukes?" And I said, "Do I have to be?" And he just laughed and walked on. Jump ahead about 25 years, 2 friends and I are attending a Knicks game at Madison Square Garden. And there's a bar that people can go to at halftime. And we go up there at halftime, and we're having a beer, and there's this blah, 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 on the other side of the room. And my friend, who's a little taller than the rest of us, he says, "That's Ali." I said, "What?" He said, "It's Muhammad Ali." And by now, of course, Parkinson's had a pretty good hold of Ali, and the shaking, and he's walking, and I said, "My God, he's coming this way." And he walks right up to me, and he looks at me. And I looked at him, and I said, "Champ." And he reached out, and he grabbed me by the lapels of my jacket, and he pulled me close, and he said, "Are you good with your dukes?" And I looked at him, and I said, "Do I have to be?" And he pulled me close again, and he said, "You're still pretty." And he walked away. A couple of things I want to say before I go. Jeff Cirillo, Ron Dane, it is a pleasure to share this dais with you both and this event with you. And I add my congratulations to all of the award winners. Also, one of the dumbest things I ever come across is this thing people get obsessed with, and that's predictions. Before every season, someone always asks me who's going to the Super Bowl. A radio station in New Orleans sent me the transcript of an interview that I did with them back in August. Host: "Greg, who's going to the Super Bowl?" Greg: "From the AFC, the Colts." Host: "And from the NFC?" Greg: "The Cowboys." Host: "The Cowboys?" Greg: "No, the Packers." Host: The Packers? Greg. No, the Cowboys. Sports takes a beating sometimes. Sometimes it's deserved and sometimes it isn't. But I wouldn't trade my job for any other. And as a result, it makes me a very appreciative person. I have been and continue to be one of the fortunate people who get to do what I do because I love it so much. But I hope that you guys will stop along the way, as I often do, to appreciate the other things around us in life and, frankly, the people in our lives. In the last year and a half, I've lost an ex-roommate, a couple of fraternity brothers from school, and the guy who hit cleanup behind me on our college baseball team. I lost my coach, and I lost the younger brother of a teammate who was like a little brother to me. I lost my dad 38 years ago, and I lost my mom last summer. We all lose people in our lives, and we think about them a lot. And hopefully we all appreciate those we still have with us. I know I do, and I tell them I love them every time I talk with them. I'm very thankful for them, and I'm very thankful to have been asked to be here today. I wish you all the very best. Thanks.
Please subscribe to this channel, give this video a thumbs up, and hit that notification bell so you get notified when we post another great episode or interview. Download the podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for your support.